I am outside Livermore Fire Station number 6. And in here, they have the longest continuously on light bulb in the world. It has been on for 120 years, since 1901. There it is, huh? It's not even connected to a light switch, but it does have a backup battery and generator. So the big question is, how has this light bulb lasted so long? It was manufactured by hand not long after commercial light bulbs were first invented. And yet, it has been running for over 1 million hours, way longer than any light bulb today is meant to last.
A while back, a friend of mine told me this story, that someone had invented a light bulb that would last forever, years ago. But they never sold it because an everlasting light bulb makes for a terrible business model. I mean, you would never have any repeat customers, and eventually you would run out of people to sell light bulbs to. I thought this story sounded ridiculous. If you could make an everlasting light bulb, then everyone would buy your light bulb over the competitors. And so you could charge really high prices, make a lot of money, even if demand would eventually dry up. I just couldn't imagine that we had better light bulbs in the past and then intentionally made them worse. But it turns out I was wrong. At least, sort of. Inventing a viable electric light was hard. I mean, this is the typical incandescent design, which just involves passing electric current through a material, making it so hot that it glows. You know, less than 5% of the electrical energy comes out as light. The other 95% is released as heat. So these are really heat bulbs, which give off a little bit of light as a byproduct. You know, the temperature of the filament can get up to 2800 Kelvin. That is half as hot as the surface of the sun. At temperatures like those, most materials melt, and if they don't melt, they burn. Which is why in the 1840s, Warren de la Rue came up with the idea of putting the filament in a vacuum bulb, so there's no oxygen to react with.
By 1879, Thomas Edison had made a bulb with a cotton thread filament that lasted 14 hours. Other inventors created bulbs with platinum filaments or other carbonized materials, and gradually the lifespan of bulbs increased. The filaments changed from carbon to tungsten, which has a very high melting point, and by the early 1920s, average bulb lifetimes were approaching 2,000 hours, with some lasting 2,500 hours. But this is when lifetimes stopped getting longer and started getting shorter. In Geneva, Switzerland, just before Christmas 1924, there was a secret meeting of top executives from the world's leading light bulb companies. Philips, International General Electric, Tokyo Electric, Osram from Germany, and the UK's Associated Electric, among others. They formed what became known as the Phoebus cartel, named after Phoebus, the Greek god of light. There, all these companies agreed to work together to help each other by controlling the world's supply of light bulbs. In the early days of the electrical industry, there had been lots of different small light bulb manufacturers, but by now, they had largely been consolidated into these big corporations, each dominant in a particular part of the world. The biggest threat they all faced was from longer-lasting light bulbs. For example, in 1923, Osram sold 63 million light bulbs, but the following year, they sold only 28 million. Light bulbs were lasting too long, eating into sales. So all the companies in the cartel agreed to reduce the lifespan of their bulbs to 1,000 hours, cutting the existing average almost in half.
But how could each company ensure that the other companies would actually follow the rules and make shorter lasting light bulbs? After all, it would be in each of their individual interests to make a better product to outsell the others. Well, to enforce the 1,000-hour limit, each of the manufacturers had to send in sample bulbs from their factories, and they were tested on big test stands like this one. If a bulb lasted significantly longer than 1,000 hours, well then the company was fined. If a bulb lasted longer than 3,000 hours, well the fine was 200 Swiss francs for every 1,000 bulbs sold. And there are records of these fines being issued to companies. But how do you make a worse light bulb in the first place? Well, the same engineers who had previously been tasked with extending the lifespan now had to find ways to decrease it. So they tried different materials, different shaped filaments, and thinner connections. And if you look at the data, they were successful. Ever since the formation of the cartel, the lifespan of light bulbs steadily decreased, so that by 1934, the average lifespan was just 1,205 hours. And just as they had planned, sales increased for cartel members by 25% in the 4 years after 1926. And even though the cost of components came down, the cartel kept prices virtually unchanged, so they increased their profit margins. So did people know that the light bulb companies were conspiring together to make their products worse? No. The Phoebus cartel claimed that its purpose was to increase standardization and efficiency of light bulbs. I mean, they did establish this screw thread as standard. You can find it on virtually all light bulbs around the world now. But all evidence points to the cartels being motivated by profits and increased sales, not by what was best for consumers.
So, one of the reasons this light bulb has lasted so long is because it was made before the cartel era. Another reason is because the filament has always been run at low power, just 4 or 5 watts. It was meant to be a nightlight for the fire station, to provide just enough light so that firemen wouldn't run into things at night. And the fact that it was always on reduced the thermal cycling of the filament and components, limiting the stress caused by thermal expansion and contraction.
The Phoebus cartel was initially planned to last at least until 1955, but it fell apart in the 1930s. It was already struggling due to outside competition and non-compliance amongst some of its members, but the outbreak of World War II is really what finished it off. So this cartel was dead, but its methods survive to this day. There are lots of companies out there that intentionally shorten the lifespan of their products. It's a tactic known now as planned obsolescence.